men in the photos are known only as the Three Tramps.
They started snapping pictures right about
here.
This is Chauncey Holt, a career criminal now living in California. Holt claims that he is this man, the tramp in the hat. His story is fantastic.
This is the story of Chauncey Marvin Holt, a longtime contract agent for the Central Intelligence Agency and a mafia associate. You're about to see the interview conducted with Mr. Holt just 8 days before he died. This is his story.
Few people know the incestuous relationship that existed and probably exists at the moment between these various very powerful elements: organized crime, intelligence community, the political and powerful business interests. I felt that the American public had a right to know as many of the details that I have available. I grew up in southern Kentucky where bootlegging was a way of life. I mean, it's probably the most important crop, just like marijuana is in certain counties now. And it was nothing unusual about bootlegging because when the Scotch-Irish immigrants came to Kentucky in the early part of the 17th century, they brought their stills with them. And whiskey making was one of their skills, and they always did it.
For the young Chauncey, there was no stigma attached to being a bootlegger.
Not only, distilled the whiskey, what we delivered it, usually to somewhere like Knoxville, Tennessee, which was close, about 40 miles, and was as far away as Cincinnati.
Chauncey Holt got around, and getting around got him in trouble. He ended up in reform school in Chillicothe, Ohio.
Now they have prisons for youthful offenders. That was what it would have been in those days, but they called it a reform school. And I'd been in there I got railroaded by the FBI for joyriding in a car. That was Hoover's big thing in those days, was catching youthful car thieves. Usually someone else caught them and they took the credit. And although we were right in the middle of the war, I mean, Hoover took the time to send wire after wire down to Louisville wanting to know why we hadn't been prosecuted. Gives you an idea what importance he placed on those type things.
This teletype, April 23rd, 1942, from Hoover to FBI Louisville office says, in part, Chauncey Marvin Holt et al., advised by return teletype status prosecution of this case. In the event final prosecution complete, submit report immediately reflecting results of prosecution. It's signed Hoover.
While I was there, I met several people that were connected with organized crime. So he said, if you want, I'll put you in touch with these guys in Baltimore who work hand in glove with Meyer Lansky. One was Cy Bloom and his brother Morris. Cy Bloom handled all the bookmaking operations for Lansky in the Baltimore area. And then it was through that connection that he came down to, Lansky came down to Baltimore to visit with Cy Bloom and to see his son Buddy Lansky, who at that time was in the Phipps Clinic. He was disabled. He's in the Phipps Clinic, and I knew him. I had gotten acquainted with him, with Buddy, and we used to go over and play chess with him and that sort of thing, because I was doing some painting work for the restoring a painting right across the street.
Chauncey Holt's skills as a painter would serve him well. A Renaissance man, he developed other skills. He became an arms expert in the military, as well as learning how to fly an airplane. Holt also did another kind of flying, but not inside a cockpit.
My uncles, by marriage, owned a small one-ring circus. And from the time I was 6 years old, I mean, I was running up and down the tight wire, you know, swinging on the trapeze. I worked in this family circus, and I did a single trapeze act. I worked in a flying act. I did a low wire act, a high wire act, shot from the cannon, all that sort of thing, you know.
The circus performer in Chauncey Holt thought getting shot out of a cannon was a hell of a lot safer and easier than getting shot at. Chauncey's Baltimore connection with Meyer Lansky would lead to a long relationship with the mobster and other important mob figures, including the head of the Detroit family, Peter Licavoli.
I did a little work for him in painting. He sent some paintings over to me to be restored, and that started a relationship with Licavoli that lasted, it lasted 50 years. It lasted from 44 until the date of his death in 1984. I had a lot of other qualities that they liked. First of all, I was a pilot. Secondly, I was a very good shooter. I was a weapons expert. And of course the art didn't help, it didn't hurt, because it extended to forgery if necessary. And of course I was a very good accountant, very good money manager. And probably I did more money managing and more fiscal type work down through the years than I did the other types of work.
Chauncey's math skills, he was brilliant with figures, caught Meyer Lansky's attention.
So Lansky was coming down to Baltimore to see Buddy, and he was going to check up on the operation, the bookmaking operation, and Cy Bloom called me. I was working in the shipyard. He called me and asked me if I'd like to come over and meet Meyer Lansky. So he told Meyer Lansky that I was a mathematical genius. Well, I may have seemed like a mathematical genius to him, but anyway, so Lansky came in and we were talking, and it turned out that he was like me in the sense that he used to work mathematical problems just like he'd work a crossword puzzle. He'd get a book with nothing but problems in it, mostly algebraic problems. So he said, I want to work out this little problem for you, and you show me the fallacy in it, because you start out with the premise and you end up and it looks like 2 equals 1. So we go down through these equations, and it started out with A equals B. Well, down in the middle of this computation, you divide by A minus B. Well, if A equals B, A minus B is 0. So I pointed it out and I said, there's a fallacy, and he said, oh yeah, that's right. He says, anything divided by 0, the answer is 0. And so I told him, well, technically he was wrong for the simple reason that the answer is not 0, it's infinity. And so he was very, very impressed. And he said, now if you ever come down to Florida, I had said I've thought about coming to Florida after the war. He says, if you come down to Florida, he said, be sure and look me up. You can tutor me in analytical, differential integral calculus, subject he was interested in. So I knew that I'd made a very, very valuable connection.
Chauncey Holt got a close-up and a personal look at one of the most powerful members of organized crime.
Lansky, although he had a very violent past, having been, a member of the Bugs and Meyer gang, and he could be as ruthless as the next person, and he could, in getting what he wanted. However, he was extremely intelligent. He was polite. He was very low key. He was compassionate. Many things that you don't find in the average gangster. He never actually thought of himself as a gangster, although to do that you'd have to exclude his early life, because he just considered himself simply a gambler who was providing the public with something that they begged for. Well, I knew him from starting in '44. I knew him until he went to Israel. As a matter of fact, I had a short letter from him just before he went to Israel saying he had decided to go to Israel and live.
Lansky writes to Marvin Holt in a letter dated May 25th, 1970. Dear Marvin, I have decided to go and live in Israel. I will be here at Ray's for a few days. Ray's is Ray Ryan's El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs. The letter goes on to say, I would like to see you before I go. Fly down here if you can. I don't dare come to L.A. If I don't get to see you before we leave, I want to thank you for the past favors. Keep your nose clean. I will write you from Israel if I don't get to see you. Your friend, Meyer. Lansky wanted to migrate to Israel, but was having difficulties entering the country. Like the letter he wrote to Chauncey, Lansky's personal appeal to the Prime Minister of Israel is also handwritten. Lansky tells Menachem Begin he wants very much to live in Israel and blames his image problems on the media. Chauncey became acquainted with another notorious crime figure, the man many say created a gambling oasis in the Nevada desert, Bugsy Siegel.
Soon after after the war, I went south and hooked up with with Lansky. Started working for his organization. I worked for his main accounting firm, and I also was office manager of one of his front organizations, which was used for a lot for stock manipulations and that sort of thing. And I also worked at the Colonial Inn, which was the plushest of the carpet joints there in Florida at that time.
The Colonial Inn in Hollandale, Florida was a hot spot. Show business types, mobsters, and politicians flocked to the glamorous gambling nightclub resort. It was Lansky's prototype for Las Vegas gambling and casinos. All the while, Holt was privy to the Lansky-Las Vegas Bugsy Siegel connection.
Actually, I met him before they started the Flamingo. The first trip that I made west with him to meet Siegel, he was going out because Siegel wanted him to go into buying the El Cortez Hotel.
On their first trip to Las Vegas, Lansky told Holt he wasn't worried about J. Edgar Hoover. The mob had compromising photos of the FBI director and his aide Clyde Tolson taken at the Del Charro Lodge in La Jolla, California. The mob was worried about Siegel's mishandling their money in Las Vegas.
The Brotherhood, who had put up $6 million, they were beginning to get concerned about their money. So we went out to talk to Siegel again, and to look into the rumors that he and Virginia Hill had been squirreling away money for their retirement. So we went out and we talked to all the vendors and so forth. This principal one was the general contractor was Dale Webb, and we talked to him, and we discovered at once that Siegel, well, he hadn't paid Dale Webb nearly as much money as he said. So it was obvious that he was stealing. So we came back. And shortly after that, they had a big meeting in Havana when all the everybody, every top mob figure in the well, not only in the country, but luckily Luciano came from Italy, came to Havana to have a conference about what they were going to do about Lansky. I mean about Siegel. Lansky pleaded for him, said, hey, look, he served us long and well. Why don't we give him just a little piece of the action and let him get out? And he came back, so he said, okay. So Lansky and I made another trip to California. And he told Lansky and I, right to our face, that we could shove it. That the Flamingo was his and he was keeping it, and that was that. Because he had a violent, uncontrollable temper, and so as far as that went, I mean, that was his death warrant.
That conversation was on 19th of June, 1947. A day later, Siegel was dead.
On the 20th, we followed Siegel around all day, to the barber shop, to his lawyer. He went over to a place on Fountain Avenue to meet a girlfriend. He didn't seem like he had a worry in the world.
Siegel was murdered, 3 shots to the head. Chauncey denied any involvement in the actual murder of Siegel. He didn't pull the trigger, he swears. But he hints at his role at Lookout performing surveillance for the mob hitmen. He never denies his relationship with another important crime figure.
Peter Licavoli was one of the most important organized crime figures in the country. He was probably the last of a dying breed. He grew up in St. Louis, a big Sicilian family. He was imported by the Purple Gang into Detroit in the early 30s to act as enforcers. Then they finally took over, and he became one of 5 ruling dons of Detroit. Detroit operated differently than, say, New York. New York had 5 separate families headed by 5 separate people. They had one family that was headed by 5 ruling dons, of which one was Peter Licavoli. Yeah, he was into everything. I mean, he was into loan sharking, and he was into anything that prostitution, anything that the mob is normally, involved in. And he had a really great love for art, and he was a sucker when it came to buying art, especially Italian art. He loved buying Italian art, and we used to buy that stuff by the roomful, because he was trying to clean up his image. And he was a competent painter. I have some of his paintings.
It was during the Kefauver Committee hearings into organized crime that Chauncey's career took a turn. Meyer Lansky had been ordered to testify.
He was one of the few guys that didn't end up in jail, because most of them ended up in jail because of contempt of Congress. But he got up there and he answered all their questions, and he appeared first without a lawyer, then he had his lawyer. But he was quick on his feet.
Chauncey is quick too, immediately accepting an offer of a unique job offered him by Lansky. The year is 1953.
I can put you in a job. If you want to have a job, I could put you in over here at the International Rescue Committee as controller at a real good job, at a real good salary. I thought it was a philanthropic organization like the Red Cross or something, like the name implies. They like those innocuous names of the CIA. So I was sitting there when a guy walked in from Washington. His name was Richard Sluter. Came in and he explained to me the facts of life, that this was a proprietary interest of the CIA.
Chauncey's aliases were many. He would use 25 different names while working for the mob and the CIA.
We had two types of aliases. We had floating aliases that more than one agent used, and a number of agents used over the years that you just slap a picture on. Now I used Charles Hormley, Robert Ralston, Marvin Hoyt, which is not too far from my own name. However, as far as deep cover agents aliases went, I had 3 deep cover agents that would withstand the vigorous scrutiny. One was the one that I used the longest time, was John R. Moon. I used Kearney L. Sigler, and I used Dean Rutz.
The CIA hadn't been in business too long, but already had a clear target, Guatemala. Chauncey assumed a new identity and began training for his mission at a secret CIA base in Arizona.
So I became Robert Ralston, and I had all these credentials in that name. So I went out to Aranya, which was a big base. Well, it became an awful big base later. It wasn't much of a base in those years. Was right near Tucson that the CIA used. It was a training facility, and I went out to get some multi-engine training because in preparation for going down to Guatemala.
Chauncey's personal records include copies of CIA contract agent paperwork. This type of supporting documentation involving a CIA contract agent has never been made public before.
I first went to Guatemala as a part of a 5-man assassination team, I guess you'd call us, that went down to figure what we were going to do. It looked like that our Benz was going to win the next year's election, and we were trying to get a CIA-approved candidate to run in against him.
But the plan was a failure, and our Benz remained in power.
So here we were with this guy who was an out-and-out communist sitting there. And at that time, Eisenhower, Dulles, and those guys all up and down the line said, you know, this guy's got to go. So we found another guy who was in prison down there, and his name is Cecilio Armas, and he was educated in the United States. He had gone to the Command and General Staff School at Leavenworth and so forth. He's caught in a coup, and they sentenced him to death, and he was in jail. So we went down and got the guy out of jail, which was very easy. All we did was just grease a few palms, and he walked right out into a limousine. You know, it wasn't a 007 type deal. You know.
Armas, backed with a 300-man army and the CIA, invaded Guatemala from Nicaragua.
I was flying a C-47, and we had a C-47 because we could either push ordnance out the door, or we could actually use it for leaflets. And of course, we were flying over Guatemala City, just distributing those leaflets for our Benz to give up and so forth, and which he did. He threw in the sponge in August. He fled the country, and of course, then Eisenhower was able to say that Guatemala was now back in the hands of the people.
Even while working for the CIA, Chauncey continued to work for organized crime.
I always kept in touch, and if if Meyer Lansky or any of his group wanted something of me, they certainly would. They didn't hesitate to ask me. When Castro landed up in the Escambray Mountains and started his little revolution, he got some aid from Lansky, simply because Lansky was just sort of hedging his bet. As a matter of fact, he had an agreement with Castro that if he took over the government, he'd let him continue operating the casinos. After Castro actually came to power in 1959, he let them operate for about 2 months, and then he confiscated the hotels, confiscated them, and so naturally they were interested in getting back to Cuba. Lansky himself, personally, had a $1 million contract out on Castro. So here we had these people, and then we had the CIA, and we had the mob, all trying to get rid of Castro.
Cuba wasn't the only interest. So was the Dominican Republic and its dictator, Rafael Trujillo.
The government was pushing very, very vigorously to get rid of Castro, and they had enlisted the aid of Trujillo and Johnny Abbas, who was his head of security, who was one of the best assassins in the world. But they suddenly, somewhere in the about this time, the State Department decided, hey, we've had enough of Trujillo. Trujillo has to go, so we're going to. So they started putting plans in the hopper to kill Trujillo. So that removed one very, very dangerous foe of Castro.
A CIA letter dated March 17, 1961, sent to a CIA team, including Chauncey, says, in case you plan to hunt this territory, recommend high-powered foreign-made rifle with telescopic scope and silencer. Have already obtained necessary licenses and paid the fees. That means the Trujillo assassination had the go-ahead. He was murdered 2 weeks later. The mob had never forgotten how Castro had double-crossed them, so they set in motion a series of deadly plans to assassinate the Cuban leader.
Lansky had he had actually offered a contract of $1 million for anyone who would dispose of Castro. Now, he had a viable, in my opinion, it was the most workable plan to assassinate Castro that was ever conceived. And they had assassin chosen. They got the weapon in. It came in with some circus equipment. It was they had rented an apartment which was within 300 yards of the television station where he used to walk back and forth and harangue for hour on end, and so forth. And but at the last minute, it was called off, and it was called off through pressure from the State Department.
The CIA didn't want to give up. They wanted a location in South Florida to keep close tabs on Castro. They again turned to Meyer Lansky.
Down in the Florida Keys at Marathon had built this airport strictly for his use, but the CIA began to use it, and we started making flights from Marathon. It wasn't too far, from Marathon into Cuba, and we would insert agents into Cuba. We would deliver arms and ammunition into Cuba. We made literally dozens and dozens of flights into Cuba in 1960.
Intrigue, ineptitude, and infighting, CIA and State Department doomed any efforts.
Everybody seemed to be working at cross purposes, and finally, at the just before the 1960 election, they came up with this idea of invading Cuba, and what started out from being a very small, over-the-beach Dieppe type raid turned into a full assault.
That full assault, the Bay of Pigs invasion, would be a complete failure, a major embarrassment for the Kennedy administration, and the impetus for Operation Mongoose.
Operation Mongoose was a ill-conceived operation, joint operation between organized crime and the CIA to actually simply kill Castro. And there's some various memos. As a matter of fact, I have a few memos how it ended up, how they were talking about what they were going to do and so forth.
Here are some of the memos Chauncey refers to. These men participated in a meeting held at a small airport between Palm Springs and Indio, California. The name? Bermuda Dunes.
In that meeting, Peter Licavoli and I flew in from Arizona. Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli came in from Chicago. William King Harvey came from Langley. William King Harvey was a